Craig Mazin loved the game. Neil Druckmann loved Craig's work. And from love, we have a beloved adaptation of The Last of Us. So why is it important that in a show about love, about failed love, about love that hurts, love that saves, love that kills, that the showrunners love the show? Deep-seated love for the original media is what got Craig involved. It's what got The Last of Us what a FX in a time of mass VFX shortage. It's what made John Payno, the show's production designer, organize the building of an entire cul-de-sac in less than a month for the epic fight scene in episode 5. It's the fact that people suffer for love. So what happens when that love isn't for a game, a novel, a comic book, but a child, a brother, a lover? And what happens when that love gets violent? The Last of Us is an apocalyptic zombie series that is hardly about the zombies. The apocalypse here teaches us more about breaking down corrupt systems than zombies. Throughout the show, we're forced into a grueling reflection on love and fear and the systems that control it. We learn within the first 10 minutes that an outbreak of Ophiocordyceps adapts to live in humans because of an increase in global temperature. The cordyceps outbreaks is truly a climate disaster of human hands. It's yet another eco-disaster that was waiting in the wings, known by the scientific community for decades before it trickled down to us. This directly parallels a lot of our own experiences with climate crises, all the way up to the revelation that oil companies knew of the pending disaster they were reaping and continue to reap way back in the 1970s. But The Last of Us isn't about oil, it's about fungi. And the use of fungi as an eco-disaster is a brilliant plot device, because fungi have always been in the story of humanity. 1789. The divide created by classism in Western Europe is at its worst, and the Great Fear, along with the poisoned grain, sweep across France. Historian Mary K. Matosian has proposed that ergot, a fungus that grows on rye, and includes bouts of violence and loads of paranoia-induced hallucination, produce the speed and violent retribution that we see in the early years of the French Revolution. 1990s. Ethnobotanist Terence McKenna, now backed by modern psilocybin mycologist Paul Stamets, surmised that early hominids' evolutionary leap of higher consciousness can be attributed to the consumption of fungi that contain psilocybin, which is the hallucinogenic compound in magic mushrooms. The consumption of psilocybin would create greater sociality, imagination, eloquence, and suggestibility. When these qualities become more pronounced in whatever group of early humans who ate the fungi, they would become smarter, more adaptable. Now there are more tools. There is more communication, there is more social control, there's more progress. A fictionalized 2003 mycologist, Ratner Pertwee, recommends bombing Jakarta because Ophiocordyceps has at last infected the Homo sapien, and there is nothing we can do to stop it. The humans who eat the cordyceps in the grain or sugar supply become more coordinated, more efficient, more connected, more freely violent. Human society collapses. There are no new freedoms, no new tools this time. Cordyceps made humanity do what, on a large scale, it refused to do. The cordyceps outbreak forces a reconnection between humanity and nature. Thus, humanity is humbled, or rather destroyed, by the same organisms that helped create it. It doesn't get more back to nature than this. What has been done to the planet has not caused an environmental quandary, but a humanitarian one. The climate disaster, the zombies, the infected, the clickers, the scary things with fungi for faces, whatever you want to call them, they are not the primary antagonist of the series. The show's true antagonist is the people Joel and Ellie find in their paths, an antagonist many of us suffer at the hands of every day, the people around us. Joel and Ellie are two hardened survivors in a world that has been dominated by this cordyceps plague. The two are hardened by loss, of life robbed from mindless violence, and of the lives they could have had if the outbreak had never happened. That reality, a dream for Ellie, but a memory for Joel. The two are haphazardly thrown together by a rebellion leader in a military-run quarantine zone in what used to be Boston, Massachusetts. We quickly learn that Ellie is immune to cordyceps control, and that the rebellion hopes to create a cure using Ellie, but she needs to be taken to the doctors. Joel takes on the task of transporting Ellie across the United States. The two experience more loss, more heartbreak, more pain on their way, but they also find something in each other that they thought they'd never have a chance at again: a family.
I'm glad that didn't work out.
Me too.
The world Joel and Ellie experience is naturally serene, peaceful, far from the grips of humanity. At the same time, the show stems from people who have reaped humanity's violence against nature. Both of Joel and Ellie's first kill in the series are the infected: the old woman next door and the infected in the mall. The necessity for violence is karmic. It comes from nature. But in the end, it's the other humans and their tribalism and how they control one another that truly perpetuates the show's violence. The greatest violence in the series is in Kansas City, which starts with violent insurrection and ends with a graphic yet darkly epic fight against the infected, is its human cause. Even though the cordyceps have shown humanity the consequences of its violence, we cannot help but continue it. This is what makes The Last of Us so terrifying and addictive. It is us in these instances. We see our society, our friends, our fear, our love reflected in every moment. It's too realistic. The disaster, a little too close to home. All of the show's secondary characters all serve to develop Joel and Ellie. Each of the tearaway segments in the episodes take situations that Joel and Ellie are in, and they say, "You think you know what's going on. You know these characters. You know the signs. You understand love. You understand zombies. You played the game. You think you know. But you don't know." Because we need to see outside of Joel and Ellie to truly understand not only what is at stake for them personally, but also the stakes for the rest of humanity. Even though Joel and Ellie aren't the main characters physically in each of these tearaways, they are the main characters thematically and emotionally. We have so many beautiful parallels and foreshadowings and foils in these characters, all of which makes us closer to Joel and Ellie. We understand them and their motivations far better than if we just spent the whole series from their perspective. Bill and Frank's tearaway is here to point out the relationship dynamic of nurturer and protector, and how it interacts violence with gender roles. Bill is Joel's perfect protector parallel. They live for another person, they protect another person, they kill for another person. Then Bill and Joel's paths cross with a nurturer, Frank and Ellie respectively. Both Frank and Ellie are full of surprising life despite it all. They are people who think of things Bill and Joel stopped dreaming of years ago. The protectors begrudgingly take them in, but learn to freely love them. They struggle with them, but that person becomes their tribe, their whole world. But that love is shaken when Bill and Joel are presented with the same question: will I let them go? And in the end, Bill does what Joel cannot. Bill gives up his control, and through giving it up, he more freely loves. Bill gives us his gendered role as protector, and in doing so is helping Frank end his life. Gives Frank his livelihood, his choice, and his life back. But Bill dies with him, purposeless, but satisfied, happy, and they die the most peaceful, non-violent deaths we see in the series. But Joel, he takes that away from Ellie. Ellie has no choice. Ellie is lied to. Ellie has no life, no purpose. Though she did not know the surgery would kill her, just scenes before we hear her dedication to nurturing humanity, to saving it, to giving her life a purpose. Joel cannot give up what he is protecting. Not only is Ellie Joel's purpose, her survival and her life are the only markers of his love that he can see. Without her, all the love dies, and Joel's heart is not equipped for that to happen all over again. So Joel sentences humanity to further destruction, further violence, further pain, but we love him for it, because we've all done something unbelievably illogical, unbelievably selfish, and unbelievably necessary in our eyes to save our love. Bill was able to do what Joel could not, because Bill had time to heal, and Joel has never had a moment to grieve. Since Sarah's murder, Joel has lived moment to moment, fear to fear, and loss to loss. Bill attained a true existence. Though tainted by the same fear that plagues Joel, Bill's access, Bill's time to explore love, fully lets him find peace. We can basically set up gender roles within the family dynamic of the father, mother, protector, nurturer. Right away, Joel is set up as an ideal patriarchal figure, hardworking, loyal, but emotionally unavailable. On the other hand, Sarah is the quintessential nurturer. In their one-parent household, she takes on the nurturer role, attentive to detail, selfless, strict, but caring. She gives Joel things he needs to live, not the things they need to survive. After Sarah is killed by the US military at the brink of their escape, Joel's role continues. He is unable to break from it. Right away in the Boston QZ, we see Joel hard at work once again, providing for Tess this time, his capability of being the patriarchal protector. Joel will protect Tess this time. He has to. But of course, he's not let off the hook that easily. When Tess dies, Joel once again loses not only his nurturer, the person he has vowed within himself to protect. So he becomes pure survival. He has lost his reason to live, to protect his family. But Joel gets another chance at living. It takes a few weeks, but Joel connects with Ellie. This young girl becomes more than cargo. She becomes family. Unfortunately, Ellie and the connection they share is not the final answer for Joel, but the beginning. Joel cannot break from his role as a protector because that is where his trauma is rooted, in failure to protect. Because it was not the cordyceps that killed Sarah, it was humanity's disregard for inconvenient people that killed her. And until Joel heals from the trauma from the loss, he cannot become whole. This murder is our first interaction in what would become Fedra. Fedra has full military control, and it isn't pseudo-democracy anymore. It is the military dictatorship, and now, more than ever, Joel must fulfill his patriarchal role because that is all that is left for him. It's not until we get much further into the wilderness that we get a Joel who's vulnerable, who has needs, who loves, and more than anything, is afraid. We get a Joel who is not a man, but a human, a living person. And when we look at David, he is Joel's patriarchal foil. He is the ultimate patriarchal image. David uses guilt and fear to manipulate and violence to control, while Joel takes away the choice through his power, uses his own guilt and fear to protect, and violence to save. The David foil shows us that Joel is still problematic and hanging on to trauma that twist his decisions, that there is potential for him to change and be more, to love fully. For Ellie, Riley is her foil in the series, with Riley as the revolutionary ideal and Ellie as the reluctant hero. Riley fights for beliefs. Ellie fights because she likes it. Riley has to make her way for herself, whilst Ellie's fate is handed to her.
You don't know what it was like to have a family, to belong. I mean, I didn't have them for long, but I had them. I belonged to them. And I want that again.
In the end, their relationship is what initially propels Ellie in a new direction away from Fedra. Riley is Ellie's potential for love, and not just the two of them together, but for Ellie to love fully after Riley's death. Violence and love are inextricably connected in The Last of Us. Anytime love starts, violence follows. And Kansas City is where the show truly grows into the violence. Joel and Ellie leave Bill and Frank's place and set out on a road trip. A classic cinema device of making two characters actually talk and get closer together. Ellie says it herself.
What's his name?
Whose name?
Your brother.
Tommy.
Younger or older?
Younger.
Why isn't he with you?
Long story.
Is it longer than 25 hours? Because I think that's what we got.
On this road trip, they share the first threads of love and connection and are immediately punished. Joel gets knocked out, Ellie shoots a man, and the violence only amplifies when they meet Henry and Sam. Henry and Sam are unbearably sweet. We see paternal influence and care in Henry that we not only haven't seen in the show yet, but is largely absent from popular media. Henry not only makes sure Sam survives, but comforts him in times of emotional distress. He's honest with him and slows down to let Sam enjoy his life. Henry is a protector and a nurturer. Henry breaks the seams of patriarchal fatherhood dictated by gender roles and is just a good caretaker. Even though Henry is younger, and Joel would never admit it, he looks up to Henry. Henry is the ideal father, and maybe what Joel could have been had Sarah not died. The time spent in Kansas City starts and ends with great violence. But we also have time to breathe. We stop, we wait, we love. We observe the in-between of all the great bouts of fear and violence. But these beats that pause, these connections, are not love for Joel. They're not happiness. They're not a breath or relief. They mean fear. Fear that Ellie is going to get killed now, that Henry and Sam will get killed. And they do meet that fate, and it's a terrifying wake-up call for both Joel and Ellie.
Yeah, I got it.
Henry, no! When Henry kills himself after killing Sam, we have to assume that Joel becomes even more connected with Henry. We learn later that Joel was also suicidal in the months after Sarah's death, that he did try to kill himself. Then he sees that fate play out right in front of him with a man he respected as a protector, after the death of the person they were protecting.
Sarah died. And I couldn't see the point anymore. Simple as that. And I wasn't scared either. I was ready. I couldn't have been more ready.
Joel knows that if Ellie dies, he'd have to die with her too. But for Ellie, it's different. They take time to bury Henry and Sam. She marks their graves. The failure that Ellie experienced with Sam, the failure to cure him, cements inside her, and the need to get outside aid to make the cure real. It's her first step of growing from a naive and rebellious teen into a responsible adult. The death of Sam actualizes the hope inside of her, and she has to get to the Fireflies, because once again, someone she loved got bitten and got taken. And she is not going to let Joel be next. Ellie wants to share her love, her privilege with everyone, and now she is willing to do whatever it takes to create a cure. Before Henry and Sam, Ellie didn't really have much of a choice in whether she was taken. It's implied that she's kidnapped by the Fireflies, presumably sometime after she has to kill Riley, then is thrown into the wild outside the QZ, where she has to stick by Joel or she won't survive. Now she wants to go forward. She is ready to push forward. Her failure doesn't turn into insecurity, it turns into resolve. This moment, these deaths, are where Ellie decides she is willing to die for the cure. Joel's fear after the deaths of Henry and Sam, the pure scale of it, is the actualization of how his trauma perceived the situation with him and Sarah, where Joel was the one who killed Sarah because he wasn't enough to protect her, and as such, he should have died afterwards. This is the source of Joel's panic attacks. He can't breathe, he can't move because of his fear, which he swore himself off to, is back in full swing. But after meeting Henry, an idealized patriarchal figure who will do anything for the person he is taking care of, but is also nonviolent, the rage-killing machine Joel dies with Henry, and he begins his descent into first the incapable Joel, who is controlled by his fear, to the Joel full of love, the Joel that messes it up. When threatened with losing Ellie, he kills 30, 40 people to get Ellie out of the hospital. Not losing Ellie is far more important than a chance of having a cure. If we look at Joel's trauma, it's not from cordyceps. Yes, it's brought down his world. Yes, Tess was lost to it. But Sarah was killed by people who thought they were serving the greater good. After Henry and Sam is where Joel and Ellie truly start to divulge paths. They no longer want the same thing.
I tried with Sam.
Tried what?
I knew he was infected. I rubbed some of my blood into his bite. I know, it was stupid, but I wanted to save him.
The deaths of their friends divide them. Ellie wants Joel's paternal help to get her to the Fireflies. She even wants to stay with him afterwards.
And when we're done, we'll go wherever you want. Tommy's, Sheep Ranch, the moon. I'll follow you anywhere you go.
Joel wants to keep Ellie safe. There is no goal. This chasm between them only grows larger, and it is the pit we overlook in the last few moments of season 1, where Ellie knows Joel is lying, and Joel knows Ellie knows, but they both keep up the pretense because they love each other. But their love is no longer honest, so it won't last.
Okay.
As much as Joel and Ellie interact with other people and are developed by them, the plot is centered around all the time they are stopped, blocked, and barred by proto-governments that come around after the apocalypse. How would we organize ourselves in an apocalypse? How much choice would we have in it? The length of The Last of Us offers one of the most in-depth explorations of this. Every governing system Joel and Ellie come across has its foundation in tribalism, love, and fear. Tribalism being who we organize with, love being the reason we strive to protect and nurture that tribe, and fear being who we kill for that tribe. All three are interrelated, but have their own bearing on humanity. Most of these governmental situations represent an impossibility for Joel and Ellie. The corruption pushes them further along their journey. Joel and Ellie both started from Fedra, a military dictatorship born out of the US military. Fedra's fast-acting control is a product of a pre-planned effort within the US government in case of emergency. Fedra is an aspect of the US government that already existed in some of our own national security strategy. We see two forms of Fedra in the series, in the Boston QZ and the Kansas City QZ. In the Boston QZ, Fedra has practices in place to euthanize the infected and uses public hangings to control the population. Their government is based on fear. Fear of the infected and xenophobia, which in this instance relates to anyone non-infected outside the QZ. The Kansas City QZ, which we only hear about, is in a later stage of military dictatorship that, instead of using more subtle violence to control, uses direct violence against the governed as their primary means of authority. As Henry describes it,
monsters, savages. Yeah, you heard right. Raped and tortured and murdered people for 20 years.
The fear here doesn't come from xenophobia or the infected. It comes within the QZ, and it erupts in violent revolution. The balance in these dictatorships is precarious. Boston QZ has its Fedra violence, but it's balanced out with the violence of the black market scene, while also cultivating a new generation of governing officers by promising luxuries and safety from said violence.
There's the other path. You swallow this pride of yours. You follow the rules, you become an officer. You get your own room, you get a nice bed. We eat well, we don't go on patrol. We're cool in the summer, we're warm in the winter, and best of all, when you're an officer, you get to tell the Bethanies of the world exactly where to shove it.
Hardly anyone strong-willed can survive these dictatorships. All of our main characters fall out from it or subvert it. Joel and Ellie cannot stay here. And there's the option of resistant movements. Marlene's Fireflies in the Boston QZ, who are largely saviors of the stories, if not complicated ones, and Kathleen's Resistance in the Kansas City QZ. Marlene's Fireflies shows a democratic resistance to fascism, though we don't see Marlene get elected as leader. Restoring democracy is listed in the values they are fighting for in Episode 1. This system remains problematic through its blind faith mechanism. It focuses on revenge and its dependence on violence. But in the end, Marlene wants to save the world. She's just willing to do anything to get there. Kathleen's rebellion shows a violent resistance to fascism. While her resistance is based similarly on revenge, her revenge is pigeonholed, all about her brother Michael. This makes her and her movement more violent, because they can justify harming just about anyone they perceive as either having harmed Michael or participating in the previous system they rebelled against that killed Michael. Kathleen's resistance is built on the fear that Fedra used to, but now it's for the tribe, not Fedra's. We come across Marlene's resistance twice in the series, in Boston and in Salt Lake City. Both times they are resistant to violence, but not above it. Kathleen's resistance, on the other hand, is all violence. There's never consideration for a non-violent option. The Fireflies' violence is more complicated, because their tribe is motivated by love. We see it in Marlene's maternal love for Ellie, and in Kim Tembo's character, whose loyalty and love for Marlene is vast.
I can do it. Kim, you don't have a fucking ear on your fucking head, could you please?
But because both of these organizations require blind faith and violence to operate, they're not places for Joel and Ellie to stay. The two, or mostly just Ellie, then come to the Lakeside Resort community. Lakeside Resort is led by a singular dictator, David, who maintains his control and authority through fear and guilt. More than any other organization in the show, the community here is motivated by survival. Not only are the infected outside their resort home, but the harsh winter led this group of people to starve. When we meet them, they are in a place where only the Christian God will save them, or so says David. But it's not God that saves them. It's non-voluntary cannibalism. This cult and the corruption and manipulation that runs through it is literally eating itself from the inside out. The people in the cult have no control. They leave everything up to their God. But their God doesn't rain manna down from heaven. He shoots deer when he can, and feeds them their dead when he cannot. The blind faith in leadership is mostly pronounced in communities such as this, where religious extremism, fueled by fear, is the primary reason the flock survives. There is no love here. There is control, and when that control is threatened, violent chaos ensues and consumes the system in literal flames. It doesn't take much to say that Joel and Ellie cannot stay here. But not all is entirely bad. As Joel and Ellie come across Jackson Commune, led by Maria, Joel's surprise sister-in-law, here they are communists and live by a law of taking only what you need and watching out for your neighbor. The Jackson Commune lives sustainably and they trade easily. They have transportation, they have art and friends, and even holidays. The authority here is elected and run by a council and is motivated by the love the community has for each other and what they have created. Here is the idealized democratic utopia. The Jackson Commune is by far the most positive display of governing in the series. However, we also see the whole commune through a lens of scrutiny and mistrust when we come at it from Ellie's point of view. And why wouldn't she be scared? All the places Ellie has come across have had some sort of catch. For Ellie, there has been no place in her entire life that is safe, that will take care of her, that will keep her safe without there being some sacrifice on her end. Ellie has never known safety and the unconditional love of a home, so when she's presented with it, she walks on eggshells, looking for any reason to bolt.
What?
What's wrong with you?
What about her manners?
It isn't until Joel expresses his feelings of safety and trust for the community that Ellie starts to soften. But one where they will never accept their fate is the cordyceps itself. which represents absolute control and an anarchist approach to authority organization. Cordyceps is entirely focused on growing and protecting, as eerie cult leader David points out.
But cordyceps. What does cordyceps do? Is it evil? No. It's fruitful, it multiplies, it feeds and protects its children, and it secures its future with violence if it must. It loves.
Cordyceps uses a mind-altering substance to get everyone on the same page. But once they're infected, they are carefully connected and massively efficient. Because Cordyceps does not have the same concerns as the other authorities, food supply, water, protection, tribalism, inequality. It's the most efficient governing system in the whole story. Cordyceps keeps its people the safest, the most well-fed, the most in line with the rules. The caveat is that the people under Cordyceps have no choice. And without that choice, there's not really a government at all. They're all one being, one organism. There's no art, there's no communication, there's no progression. This system of anarchy does not apply. Joel and Ellie, for all their violence and chaos and want for stability, cannot stay here. Not to mention that Ellie physically cannot. While The Last of Us does offer a vast display of these different organizations and authority, from military dictatorship to utopia to cults, I think that it misses the more constructive and affirming forms of organization. By focusing primarily on the negative forms of government, The Last of Us interprets these as the more realistic circumstances for the collapse of modern society, but they aren't. They are simply outcomes that tonally match the show and serve more as a warning than a crystal ball as to what our future could be like after a global disaster if we stop trying to change our society for the better. The Last of Us certainly warns us of unseen disasters and the importance of science, but even more, it makes us think about what we have right now. The room around you when you're watching the series, where you'd be if zombies took over, who you'd be with. Ultimately, the series simply teaches us through Joel and Ellie, the places they go, and the people they meet, that it is impossible to survive without love. For all its immersivity and zombie fights and constant threat of the world ending again and again and again, The Last of Us is hardly a thriller. It makes us think about ourselves now, what we can change now, how we live now, rather than how the world ended. Or in our case, how it all could potentially end. But how were the showrunners, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, able to convey this from a video game into a TV show? Check out this video as we find out more about the adaptation of The Last of Us.